Hello, and welcome back to the Go-Tanium Show. Boy, do I have a treat for you today. We are going to talk about DIY Tanium, do-it-yourself, custom content. Now, 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, I left Microsoft, the big Microsoft, to come to this little company called Tanium. Why did I risk all the security and professional rewards of Microsoft to come to this little company that, quite honestly, a lot of people hadn't heard of? I did it because I saw something that just lit me up on the inside. It's like, wow, I can actually take my PowerShell scripts that I've been working on and I can send them to all these machines in the company and get results back really fast in a nice grid interface. And I don't have to worry about all those PowerShell remoting tricks and all these things to try to get my code to talk to all those machines. And so as a scripter in the enterprise, I did VBScript for like 12 years in the world of Windows. I did PowerShell for probably 8 years or so. And all of a sudden, here's this platform I can arbitrarily execute my code anywhere. And I'm actually kind of rambling on the intro here because I just love to talk about this topic. But it's not just me today. We actually have a special guest. Now, I have to tell you, when I started the Go-Tanium show, I was brainstorming what kind of things would I like to talk about. And today's guest was one of the first people on my list. I thought, I want to introduce the world to Rory Prendergast. This guy has a really neat story to tell about Tanium and his passion for helping you be productive and rule and dominate your world with your own code on the Tanium platform. But before I continue to steal any more of his thunder, Rory, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for our audience today?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Like you, I have the same feelings about the ability to deploy arbitrary code. It is the thing that drew me to Tanium in the first place. I was probably one of the first ever paying Tanium customers. We bought Tanium at the business I was working at for all the reasons that you just mentioned. I was a sort of scripter automator type person, VBScript and Perl and all that stuff. And I saw this platform and I thought, man, this is like a glue accelerator. I can get everything out there, all the little problems that we have. I can fix all these things, in a jiffy. And I think I started almost 9 years ago now, or maybe 9 years ago. I don't know. Time's
Wow.
been moving quickly.
So do you have like an employee number? Like,
I'm
how?
told that I'm employee number 10.
Wow.
But I honestly, if I think back, I don't know if there were 10 people here. There maybe I don't know. But yeah, there was it was a really small amount of people working on Tanium. It was pretty eye-opening to see what a legitimate startup looked like. It was very
Yeah. Well, Rory is well revered and loved here at the company, and I really wanted you to have a chance to meet him. Now, Rory, I have to ask before we get going, what is that behind you on the desk, that big beaker-looking thing?
Yeah, that's a Chemex coffee device. Basically, you just filter in the top and you pour coffee over. I got tired of looking at my Mr. Coffee. It's not pleasant to look at, and I actually find that thing kind of pleasant to look at. It's not a Chemex commercial, but I kept on seeing it on synthesizer videos, which I'm a big synth nerd, and I was like, I just need that thing. So that's what it is. It's a coffee thing.
Cool, man. All right. Well, let's talk about, for our audience, when we talk about Tanium content, that means a lot of things. But for some of our beginners who are just watching the first time today, what is content? So you think about all of the Tanium platform, all the moving parts. Rory, can you give us kind of just a big picture and a top down? What is content on the Tanium platform?
Yeah, so like at Tanium, we tend to use words that have meaning elsewhere in the English language, and we'll just abuse them. Content is one of those. I think the way to think about content in general, if you think about like Netflix as a platform, well, their content is all their TV shows, and so Tanium as a platform, our content is anything you consume on the platform. Over the years, it's sort of shifted to mean the things that people write that we don't ship sort of on manifest, meaning sort of more unofficial things that get written to fill small gaps, or things that customers write themselves. So that's sensors, packages, saved questions, which are containers for sensors and dashboards and all these sorts of things. That's a basic definition of content.
Yeah. So we think about, there's a lot of content in Tanium. You've got your core content out of the box, those sensors that you use all day long, things like computer name and IP address that we like to talk about, installed applications. But then on top of that, you've got modules that have their own content set. And I always use this analogy with customers. I talk about like Star Wars Battlefront 2 or something like, so you install a Tanium client. We get to ask this all the time. So what's going on in the client? Well, we install the application, the client agent. And so that's like your Star Wars Battlefront. But then you get online in some battle and you see some dude with some cool piece of armor. Like, how do I get that? Well, that's DLC, right? So you've got the downloadable components, and that's what your content is. So you got your modules that are this DLC type stuff going into the client. You've got then we have these different solutions. So you go to the solutions page and you get the baseball cards up top with the modules, and at the bottom are the extra bells and whistles, these little solutions. And some of those, depending on the type of install you have, you might have a labs tab there as well in your lab environment. And then beyond that, there's TAM created content, and then content that you create as the customer. So Rory, you've worked on some of that core content. What kind of stories do you have to share with us around like core content?
Yeah, I mean, core content is something that has evolved over the years. When people think about the stuff that you just get that makes Tanium Interact work, like the sensors you mentioned, IP address, installed applications, a lot of that code is the same code that it's been for many years. Some of those sensors predate me at Tanium. I have a hunch that our CEO Orion may have written some of those, and they're still shipping. And I think that says a lot about what needs to be done to get a lot of really useful information off Tanium. The answer is sometimes it's not much. One thing I usually like to tell people is that often the interesting thing is not the scripts themselves. It's the fact that you can drive them everywhere and stack the answers up and bring them back. And that's the real magic of content. Some of this stuff is really pretty basic. Some of it's pretty complicated, but a simple sensor is probably and should stay simple forever.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I know you have had a number of customer conversations specifically around this area of how do I create you wrote a class, how do I create my custom content? We'll talk about that as we go throughout the session today. But talk about what kinds of questions did you ask customers in this space, and what were some of the themes that you kept hearing from customers?
Yeah, I must have talked to, I think, 20 something customers over the last, since the beginning of 2020. I spent most of this last year focusing on customers that are writing code. As the vendor, since it's not something that they don't buy the ability to write code, it's pretty hard for us to understand what their wants and needs might be. Customers can't vote with their dollar for this thing, right? So we would make guesses or hear from customers who were, had real specific features. But oftentimes, if you just reach out to customers and ask them, what are your feelings on writing custom code? What are your pain points? What features do you need? They'll open up and tell you, things that are really interesting. Customers have said anything from, I want the UI to, do X, Y, or Z around creating custom content, all the way up to and including, I want my content to be pulled automatically out of, a source code repository, like a Git repository. They want help doing continuous integration into their Tanium servers. And that's been pretty eye-opening, right? Because that stuff has typically been the domain of the vendors, where our job is to create this, big software lifecycle chain. But I think in the last few years, we're starting to see that, at these enterprises, and not always the large ones. It's usually just a cultural thing, who does the hiring and what kind of people they want to work with. So it's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah. And I know, being an admin myself and having all these scripting tools at my disposal, whether it's on Windows or Mac or Linux, I have already a large bag of tricks that I've created, whether it's stuffed into 30 different directories that I have to go looking for every time I want to go find where did I put that script, or if I'm one of those neat people that have it all checked in on GitHub and organized. But a lot of us as admins already have that base of content, and we want to be able to leverage it across our enterprise, where today we might have kind of duct tape type solutions to get that code out there and get the responses, and they may be incomplete, but Tanium gives us a way to step beyond that and not only have that completeness, but also the scale and the speed and frankly the ease of use that the Tanium platform provides.
Yeah, on that point, just really quickly, something a customer interview revealed to me is something that we all of us kind of know implicitly. Like we get a good sense of it, but it's really neat to see it articulated from a customer's point of view. And what they had said was that the thing that they value a lot is their ability to take their existing stuff or things that they invent, for deployment on Tanium. And there's this really fast feedback loop. You're running it, maybe you're running it on some test systems, but you can see really quickly how that bag of scripts that you've accumulated actually runs across a whole wide array of machines in like the real world. And it allows you to fix problems that might be in those scripts that you didn't realize for all these edge cases. And you can do it all really quickly, like, wash, rinse, repeat until you get it just right. And that's something that I don't know anything else that provides that level of satisfaction.
Yeah, I was working with a customer recently, and they had a large VDI presence, and they had disk space issues. Typically, you're trying to thin provision some of these VDIs. And so I just kind of got them started, and they were able to take their own disk cleanup script, and that was customized to their environment. They knew what places to go look for the extra dead weight files, and they were able to take that as they became a Tanium customer. All of a sudden, these ideas start popping. Look at here's our daily operations in IT. How can we really take this to the next level? And so they were able to take that disk cleanup script, move it into a Tanium package, and gut a lot of that handling around it that was kind of complicated and get just the core of it in there. So now they can actually automate this with Tanium to say, okay, let's go find any machines with disk space less than X and then deploy this package. And you set it and forget it.
Yeah.
I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yeah. Give yourself a weekend, like just turn it on and walk away.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful feeling. And that was a thing that drew me to Tanium, like that right there. I think a lot of people in IT are overworked, and any kind of an edge, any kind of a simple accelerator is worth its weight in gold. So you can have a dinner with your family, or you don't have to walk out of a movie theater. That stuff is pretty great.
We've all been there. Yeah, you get that call at the theater, like, "Hey, I'm out here with my family, but work is calling," and we say, "Well, okay, I've already automated it. We done. Here's the package, right?"
Yeah.
So we have I like to say we have a cross-platform endpoint management platform. There's a lot of diversity inside the world of Tanium. Talk for a minute about the languages that we write these sensors and packages in. Where did we get started? Where's the bulk of our content? Where are we headed? That kind of thing around authoring.
Yeah, sure. So, language choices, it's always religious. Typically people will, fight for their own particular language. And I think the reason for that is because it's truly difficult to learn a new programming language. It's a lot of time outlay, especially if it's not your main job. But we've seen a shift. When Tanium started, it was VBScript was basically everywhere, and we couldn't rely on PowerShell, for instance, to be on all of the machines. So we weren't really able to sort of say, well, you can use this content, but you have to go and make sure like the .NET framework and PowerShell version, whatever, is installed. Today, after all these years, like we're starting to see customers, they'll just opt for PowerShell. Most everybody, Windows systems administrators would prefer PowerShell over VBScript in a heartbeat. So, for Windows people, I would say that's probably the number one language choice out there. In fact, we have data about this from customers that I'd surveyed. And for everybody else, there's a choice between Bash and Bash, any kind of POSIX shell, really. You get to put whatever you want in the shebang. So if people don't know what I'm talking about, just tune out for the next 3 seconds. But for those that do, if you're a Linux scripter, you can put bin sh in the shebang. You can put bin bash, bin zsh, wherever you want to execute. You can put user bin env perl in the shebang and write Perl code, if you dare. Ruby, anything you want. Now, those you're going to farm out to the OS's interpreter. So you don't know what version of that's going to be, and that can be problematic. But for all other cases, you have Python. Man, I got something in my throat. Sorry. So for all other cases, you have Python. We ship a Python interpreter down to endpoints as part of certain product modules or as part of initial content. So you can write your stuff in Python, and that's actually Tanium's Python interpreter. So you're guaranteed to know that that's there. It'll be a certain version, and it should be functional. And I think on the non-Windows systems, people are opting for Python for sure. For some folks, that's a learning curve, right? Like Python's a real programming language with real sharp edges, but it is a lot more fun to write to me than Bash, that's for sure. And then of course on Solaris and AIX, the sort of legacy big iron systems, the only option is whatever shell they happen to ship with, which can be a real fun endeavor.
Yeah, you and I actually were just having a conversation internally last week where I said, hey, my POC customer's telling me that the sensor is complaining that netstat's not available. And that living off the land kind of dependencies across all these systems, you've got, I come from a Windows world background where it's like, I did VBScript for over a decade, and then PowerShell came along. It's like, okay, forget the VBScript. I can do this in one line. And so a lot of people would ask, why can't I just do everything in PowerShell? But, you don't know. Actually, by now, with it, I'm sure everybody's on Windows 10. You don't have any Windows 7 out there, anything like that anymore, right?
Nobody does. Nobody has any of that anymore.
Nobody's got any of that anymore, right? So you have to write to the lowest common denominator sometime as a coding practice. That can be painful, especially when you're hoping that external binary is there and you go to reach for it and it's a miss. It's not there.
Yeah. I mean, there's the similar issues in Linux for userland. Userland in the Linux is shrinking, right? The MO for a Linux distribution is how small can we make the base distribution? And of course, if you're going to build an application, you're going to try to make sure that you're using the tiniest Linux distribution options that you can. And that means that, there's certain utilities that people have leaned on for years, sysadmins, that sometimes they're not there on a real thin Linux. So the issues, they're the same issues on all the platforms. It just depends on what you get when you're sort of farming out to whatever the OS will provide.
Yeah, that's what we noticed at this customer was some of their newer Linux distros had dropped some of these old tools. And granted, they should. Some of them have been deprecated for years, just nobody realized it. Nobody bothered to read the man pages that, oh, wait, this is really deprecated now. But by golly, it's what I know, and I just want it to work.
Yep.
Yeah. So when it comes to types of content in Tanium, what we're talking about here on the show today is sensors and packages, primarily code that you're going to execute on the endpoint. But there's also like deploy packages. You can write your own software distribution packages and bundle your own code in there. In threat response, you've got IOCs and signals. So there's lots of places in Tanium for your own content and expression and flavor to make the platform your own. It's a platform. It's there. It's the toolbox. I like to say it's like a bucket of Legos. And here's the new expansion set coming in. Oh, look what I can build now. So you can build all these things and just have fun with it. And it's a great playground. But speaking of playgrounds, we'll probably talk about this before the show's over, but you want to be careful not to use prod as your playground, right? Yeah. But so Rory, again, 101 on content here. What's the difference between a sensor and a package, and what are some of the rules there?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. People have been doing it for a long time. They're surprised to learn that, of course, if somebody's walking into Tanium, it's not so obvious, what each of these things are for. And again, it goes back to the fact that our we're just reusing words in the English language to mean things, right? So you kind of have to understand how to speak Tanium. For us, the word sensor, it's not like a network sensor or, or some external device. What it is a piece of code that executes when you put a sort of a noun in one of the Tanium questions, right? So get IP address and computer name. So IP address and computer name are the sensors. For a lot of people, this will be Tanium 101, but if you're new to it, it's not obvious. And the rules for sensors are not really enforced by Tanium. And I think that's a really important point. And we make this point in our training classes. These are arbitrary programming languages. This is Bash and VBScript, and there's no, VBScript bumper bowling. It's in PowerShell. There's nothing that you can turn on that I know of by default that would say, make this read only always, right? You're writing the code, so it's up to you. So that being said, when you're writing a sensor, your job is to make sure that you're not making changes to the machine when somebody is asking a question. That's really unexpected. And customers have done it. I think customers that are poking through the UI will see a script box in the sensor area, and immediately it says, PowerShell at the top, and they go, I've got PowerShell, I'm going to paste this thing in. And then when somebody asks a question, something unexpected happens, like something gets installed, right? And that's kind of a Tanium no-no. There's nothing we can do, because these are arbitrary programming languages, to really detect that with the Tanium system that we have today. Certainly, we're thinking about that in the future, but it's something that is not obvious. Similarly, packages. Packages are for making changes. So if you have to make a change to a machine, that's where you would go. You deploy a package. They're very deliberate. You've got to target them to a set of machines. You have to do that before you run it. Whereas questions that use sensors that are read-only, those are not so deliberate. They run on as many machines as you have visibility rights to. So those are the basic ground rules. I mean, there's a bunch more, but in general, packages are read-write and sensors are, should be read-only. Every so often, you have to make a change with a sensor, but you at least have to know that you're breaking the spirit of the law, and it had better be an absolute emergency.
So then that leads us to the combo, right? So what is a sensor package combo?
So sensors, they have a maximum execution time enforced at the client of 60 seconds. Now, 60 seconds is a very long time. If you are spinning a CPU or something with your sensor for 60 seconds, I think your users are going to notice. So a pretty good, and I should say, if you're writing Python, there's a way to time out the sensor. You can set your own timeout values. So if you wanted to say, I wrote the sensor and I don't ever expect it to take more than 1 second, you can encode that value in the sensor if you'd like to. But if you need a little bit more time, we think a slow sensor is 1 or 2 seconds. That's pretty slow. That's a long time. Most of your sensors should be finishing in, few hundred milliseconds a second. If you need more time, you can deploy the sensor out in a package, basically take the same code, and instead of returning the data to the screen, write it to some kind of text file or place on disk. And then your package is doing more of the work, and then a sensor comes around and you write the sensor that just reads out of that text file. So that's kind of a combo that we've been doing over the years. It works pretty well. We'll always tell a customer, if you just have to take more time, consider the package sensor combo. The downside, of course, is your data is only as fresh as the last time the package executed. But that's kind of the whole point, really.
Yeah, and I've been reminded by my customers that sometimes I'll tell them, well, this might take an hour to get your result. And they're like, no way, you don't get it. We're not used to getting anything that fast. So it's actually not that bad after all. In Tanium, we're thinking seconds are just precious. And customers that, well, if it takes a couple hours, if the data's a couple hours old, I'm really okay with that. And it's a different view of things. Yeah.
That's a super important point. Tanium will mess up your mind in terms of what's acceptable. For us who have been here a while, it is absolute. If it's not right away, what do we think we're doing? And to customers, it's not expected. The other thing I think that while we're talking about content being something that, basic sensors and packages, being something that's interesting and new sort of in the market, something that customers have said to me, which rings true, is it's not just the fact that you can deploy whatever script you want and you can do it really, really quickly. But also that when you see the data, that you know it's the truth. And I think that's a really powerful feeling. I think of all the things that, thinking back to the demos we used to give to customers who just couldn't believe that the data was rolling in off their endpoints. Sure, it came in quickly, and sure, it was easy to read and understand. But I really think the thing that is sort of unsung is that when you're seeing that data, it is what the endpoint says it is. It's not, it's not cached out of some database somewhere, and you're just kind of wondering, is that the reality? It is the reality, and I think that's just incredible, especially in a outage or incident situation. You don't have to wonder.
Yeah, that's really the value of Tanium. That's your source of truth now. Yeah, and you don't have to worry that it was from last week or last month or whenever we were at last able to scan the environment. We've all been there trying to manage enterprise data in a spreadsheet, and it's just pain. And that's why Tanium is so glorious. I hate to interrupt such a good interview, but we are obviously over time. Normally, we try to keep our episodes 15 to 20 minutes. This is a very special interview with Rory Prendergast, a legend here at Tanium, talking behind the scenes about custom content, sensors, and packages that really do personalize and make Tanium your own for your business. So as we wrap up this half of the conversation, check out the show notes below for some links to our community content around sensors and packages and best practices for the creators in our audience. Be sure to check that out. Also, the DIY Tanium bit.ly short link will take you to our training site where you can find the content outline for the advanced content class that's completely free for customers that Rory authored and referred to through the class. So the next episode, part 2, we're going to pick up this interview right where we left off. So we look forward to seeing you on the balance of that interview in episode 10, part 2 of DIY Tanium content. And until then, go Tanium.